I flew 13 hours to surprise my family for Christmas, first time home in 5 years. No one picked me up, my seat was gone, and my cousin laughed. Didn't know ghosts got invites. My sister said, stay out of the photos. Even mom whispered, just don't start anything. I just nodded and proclaimed, you won't see me again. 3 months later, I did something that set off a chain reaction. Last night, my dad called me crying. What did you do? I, 29M, stepped off that 13-hour flight from Singapore feeling like I could conquer the world. 5 years away building my tech startup, missing every birthday, every holiday, every family gathering. But I'd made it. The company was thriving, and I was finally coming home for Christmas. The first red flag should have been when nobody answered my calls about picking me up from the airport. I convinced myself they were probably busy with last-minute preparations. Mom had always been a perfectionist about the holidays. I caught an Uber to the family house, my childhood home where generations of our family had gathered every Christmas Eve for the past 30 years. The decorations looked incredible from the outside. Mom had outdone herself. I could hear laughter and music spilling from the windows as I dragged my suitcase up the front steps. When I walked through that door, the entire room went silent. 23 family members, all staring at me like I'd just crashed a funeral. My cousin Jake was the first to break the silence with that laugh that still haunts me. He looked me up and down and announced to the room that he didn't know ghosts got invites to family gatherings. The room erupted in uncomfortable chuckles. I forced a smile and tried to play it off, telling everyone how good it was to see them after so long. But something was wrong. Really wrong. I looked around for my usual spot at the dinner table, the chair that had been mine since I was 7 years old, right between Mom and my sister Sarah. There was no chair, no place setting, nothing. When I asked Mom about it, she looked everywhere except at my face and mumbled something about not having enough space this year. My sister Sarah appeared at my elbow then, her voice low and sharp. She told me the family photographer would be arriving soon for the annual Christmas portraits, and I needed to stay out of the shots. When I asked her what she meant, she just walked away. I spent the next 3 hours floating around that house like a ghost. Conversations stopped when I approached groups. People found sudden reasons to walk away when I tried to catch up with them. Even my younger cousins, who used to follow me around like puppies, wouldn't make eye contact. The breaking point came when Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. She looked exhausted, older than I remembered, and she whispered those words that shattered something inside me. She begged me not to start anything, to just let the evening pass peacefully. I stared at this woman who had raised me, who used to brag about my achievements to anyone who would listen, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. I asked her what I could possibly start when nobody would even talk to me. She couldn't answer. She just walked away. I found myself standing alone in the living room, watching my family laugh and share stories and create memories without me. The photographer arrived and started arranging people for pictures. I moved toward the group instinctively, and the photographer actually put his hand up to stop me. He said the family had specifically requested certain groupings. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some misunderstanding or oversight. This was deliberate. They had written me out of the family while I was gone. I walked over to Dad, who was adjusting his tie for the photos. I told him I was leaving, and I asked him why nobody seemed to want me here. He looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Disappointment, maybe even disgust. He said I'd made my choice 5 years ago when I moved halfway around the world instead of staying to help with Grandma's illness. The room had gone quiet again. Everyone was listening. Dad continued, his voice getting louder. He said I'd missed Grandma's last Christmas, her funeral, Mom's surgery, Sarah's divorce, and my nephew's birth. He said I'd sent money instead of showing up, like that could replace actually being there. My sister stepped forward then, her face twisted with years of built-up resentment. She said I'd become a stranger who only called when I needed something, who bragged about my success while the family struggled with real problems. She said they'd learned to be a family without me, and honestly, it was better that way. The accusations kept coming. I was selfish. I was arrogant. I'd abandoned them when they needed me most. I'd chosen money and career over family. One by one, they laid out 5 years of grievances I never knew existed. I stood there taking it all, feeling smaller and smaller with each word. When they were done, I looked around that room one more time. I saw my nephew, Sarah's son who I'd never met, hiding behind his mother's legs, staring at this stranger who was supposedly his uncle. I nodded slowly and told them they were right about one thing. They wouldn't see me again. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. Update 1. The flight back to Singapore was the longest 13 hours of my life. I kept replaying every moment, every word, trying to understand how I'd become the villain in my own family's story. By the time I landed, I'd made a decision that would change everything. I spent the next 3 months doing something I'd never done before. I investigated my own family. I hired a private investigator in my hometown and started digging into what had really happened during those 5 years I was gone. What I found destroyed whatever remaining love I had for these people. Grandma hadn't just been sick. She'd been systematically financially abused by my Uncle Tom and his wife. They'd convinced her to sign over power of attorney and had been draining her accounts for 2 years before she died. The family knew. They all knew, and they did nothing. Mom's surgery wasn't some emergency they couldn't reach me about. It was a planned procedure that she'd been postponing for months because she couldn't afford it. Know why? Because she'd been secretly sending money to my cousin Jake, who developed a gambling addiction and threatened to kill himself if she didn't help him. Sarah's divorce wasn't the amicable split she'd made it sound like in our brief phone calls. Her husband had been cheating on her with her best friend for 3 years. But here's the kicker. The entire family knew about it and never told her because they liked him better than they liked her. And my nephew? The child I'd supposedly missed the birth of? He wasn't even Sarah's biological son. She'd found out her husband had gotten his mistress pregnant, and when the woman couldn't handle raising a child, Sarah took him in. The family thought this was noble. I thought it was insane. But the real revelation came when I found out about the inheritance. Grandma had left everything to me. Everything. The house, the investments, the family business, all of it. She'd done it 2 years before she died, when her mind was still sharp, because she said I was the only one in the family who'd made something of myself without asking for handouts. My family had been hiding this from me for 3 years. Uncle Tom had been forging documents and claiming to be the executor of the estate. He'd been telling everyone that Grandma had changed her mind before she died and split everything among the grandchildren. They'd been living off what should have been my inheritance while painting me as the selfish one who'd abandoned them. I hired a lawyer. Actually, I hired 3 lawyers. Update 2. The legal case took 2 months to build, but when we struck hard. The forensic accountants found every fraudulent transaction, every forged document, every lie they'd built their new lives on. Uncle Tom had been using the inheritance money to fund his son's failed restaurant ventures. 3 restaurants in 2 years, all failures, all funded with my grandmother's money. Jake's gambling debts had consumed another huge chunk. Mom's medical bills had been paid with money that was legally mine, money she could have simply asked me for instead of being manipulated into secrecy. But I wasn't done. Not even close. I discovered that my family had been telling people in our hometown that I'd cut them off financially, that I'd become too successful and arrogant to help them anymore. They'd painted themselves as the victims of my ambition. The truth was the opposite. They'd been living off my inheritance while telling everyone I was the selfish one. So I decided to set the record straight in the most public way possible. I contacted the local newspaper where my family had always been prominent members of the community. Dad had been on the city council for 15 years. Mom volunteered at every charity event. They were respected, admired, seen as pillars of the community. I gave the newspaper everything. Every document, every financial record, every piece of evidence of the systematic fraud they'd committed against their own family member. I told them the story of my Christmas homecoming, how I'd been treated like a pariah while they lived off money they'd stolen from me. The story ran on the front page with the headline, "Prominent local family accused of elder abuse and inheritance fraud." But that was just the beginning. I filed criminal charges against Uncle Tom for elder abuse and fraud. I sued the entire family for emotional distress and defamation. I had the estate frozen and demanded a full accounting of every penny that had been spent. Then I did something that I knew would hurt them more than any lawsuit ever could. I bought the restaurant where the family held all their important gatherings. The place where they'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, graduations for the past 20 years. I bought it and immediately closed it for renovations that would take indefinitely long to complete. I bought the building where Dad's insurance office was located and didn't renew his lease. I bought Mom's favorite boutique shop downtown and closed it permanently. One by one, I started purchasing pieces of their world and making them disappear. The community that had once respected my family started asking questions. How could they afford lawyers to fight these charges? Why hadn't they mentioned that their successful son had been sending money all these years? Why had they been so secretive about Grandma's estate? Update 3. The social pressure became unbearable for them faster than I'd expected. Small towns thrive on reputation, and theirs was crumbling daily. Sarah lost her job at the bank when her employer decided they couldn't have someone involved in a financial fraud scandal handling customer accounts. Jake's wife left him when she found out about the gambling and the lies. Uncle Tom's other son, the one who wasn't involved in any of this, publicly disowned his father and changed his last name. Mom stopped leaving the house entirely. Dad resigned from the city council in disgrace. The family business, a small construction company that had been in our family for 40 years, started losing contracts as word spread about the scandal. Nobody wanted to hire people they couldn't trust. But the thing that really broke them was when I purchased the cemetery plot next to Grandma's grave. Not for myself. I had no intention of being buried anywhere near these people. I bought it to put up a memorial bench with a plaque that told Grandma's real story. How she'd worked 3 jobs to put her children through school. How she'd saved every penny to leave her family secure. How she'd trusted the wrong people with her final wishes. Every visitor to her grave would now see the truth about what her family had done to her memory. 3 months after the legal proceedings began, I started getting the phone calls. First it was Sarah, crying and begging me to drop the charges against Uncle Tom because his health was failing from the stress. She said the family would pay back every penny, that they'd make it right somehow. Then it was Mom, whispering apologies and trying to explain how everything had gotten so complicated, how they'd never meant for it to go so far. Jake called drunk one night, screaming at me for destroying his marriage and his life. He said I was a monster for turning my back on family over money. I didn't answer any of them. Last night, Dad called. I was in my Singapore office, working late on a new project, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. I'd been ignoring my family's calls for weeks. But something made me pick up. Dad was crying, actually sobbing into the phone like a broken man. He asked me what I'd done to them. Not what I'd done to him, or to Mom, or to the family finances. What I'd done to them as people. He said Mom hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 weeks. She just sat in Grandma's old chair, staring out the window at the house across the street that I'd bought and left empty. He said she kept asking what kind of son she'd raised, how she'd failed so completely that her own child could destroy his family without blinking. Sarah had attempted suicide 2 weeks ago. She'd left a note saying she couldn't live with the shame of what they'd done to me, what they'd done to Grandma's memory, what they'd done to themselves. She was in psychiatric care now, and her son was living with neighbors because she couldn't take care of him. Uncle Tom had suffered a massive heart attack and was in intensive care. The doctors said the stress had literally broken his heart. His wife had filed for divorce and was claiming she'd never known about the fraud, though the evidence suggested otherwise. Dad told me the family name had become a joke in town. Their church had asked them to stop attending because their presence was causing too much disruption. The local grocery store had banned them after other customers complained about shopping near the thieves. He said he understood now why I'd done it. He said they deserved everything that had happened to them. But he begged me to consider whether destroying his family was worth whatever satisfaction I was getting from my revenge. Then he said something that stopped my heart. He said Grandma would be ashamed of all of us. I hung up the phone and sat in my office for 3 hours, staring out at the Singapore skyline and thinking about what kind of person I'd become. They were right about one thing. I had changed in those 5 years away. I'd become someone who could systematically destroy his own family without losing a single night's sleep. Someone who could turn love into strategy and family bonds into weapons. But they were wrong about something too. This was never about the money. This was about the 13-hour flight home to people who'd already buried me in their hearts. This was about sitting in that living room watching my family celebrate my absence. This was about learning that the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had been telling lies about me for years. This was about coming home to find out that home didn't exist anymore. As I'm writing this, I still don't know if what I did was justice or just revenge dressed up in legal documents. I don't know if Grandma would be proud of me for fighting for her wishes or ashamed of me for destroying her family in the process. What I do know is that Dad was right about one thing. I won't see them again. Not because they don't want me there this time, but because I finally understand what they knew 3 months ago. Some bridges are meant to be burned. The question I'm left with now is whether I'm standing on the right side of the ashes.